Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. We'll get started. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Deidre, and I am the workshop designer and the webinar instructor here at Live in Farms. Thanks again for those who are joining us again for, after multiple times. And of course, welcome to the new people. This is our Your Waste to Edible Greens webinar series. And today, we're actually going to be talking about something I find quite interesting, quite special. And this is going to be lesson number 7, which is called Output Poop for Microalgae. And you can kind of guess by the name, we're going to be learning about microalgae. We're going to be learning about how that links to the Hive Explorer. And the activity for today that I'm going to walk you guys through is one that we do with the students, and it's making a photobioreactor. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at how microalgae links to the Hive Explorer and why we're talking about it at all. And the biggest reason we're talking about it is actually because of, as you can see in the outputs there, is the poop, the frass. And frass is the scientific term for insect poop. And when you're using the Hive Explorer, you're going to notice that these guys, naturally, if you're feeding them properly, they're going to poop a lot. And again, like I said, that's a perfectly natural process. And if you wanted to, you technically could just throw the poop right away as you're cleaning out the Hive Explorer. But we want to show you guys that there are other ways and that you can use that, because it is actually quite a useful resource for us to use, and it has some great properties that we'll be discussing more. Okay, and something to note about mealworm frass is that, which I have some right here, if you just put it in a jar, once it's dried out, it's actually you don't smell much of an odor. It stays dry. It's this very fine powder. And the one thing is that if you have a dust allergy, then that is something that you need to be mindful of, since mealworm frass is quite fine. But other than that, it's not like it's toxic or anything. It's just good hygiene to wash your hands before and after handling. And mealworm poop is quite rich in starch and fiber and various other minerals that we'll be looking at the mineral profile in a second. We'll be sharing that with you. And it's a great resource, especially if you're doing things like aquaculture or just for agricultural purposes as well. And we'll talk about why. Okay, so why should we use mealworm poop? Mealworm poop or mealworm frass is very rich in nutrients. It helps to give plants the kinds of nutrients that are helpful for them to grow, and like plants, like humans, plants will need not just water, but they'll also need food, and the food that they sometimes get from the soil, from dead organic matter. It's all part of the circle of life. And aside from the plants, you can also grow algae and microalgae, which is, again, what we're going to be talking about today. And there's a lot of sustainability implications with the use of microalgae. And when talking to students, or when going through this lesson with students, that's a big part that we talk about. And mostly we'll be actually discussing the sustainability aspects in the next lesson. It's a great way for the students to get into the subject. Okay, so here, what I've shared on the screen is the nutrient profile, the nutrient breakdown, which we've had done on the frass that we get from the mealworms. You don't need to know all the specific details, but just as something to note is that it's quite high in macro, micro, and trace minerals. And the nitrogen is really important. That's particularly for the green pigment that you find in plants, which is chlorophyll, and that helps with the process of photosynthesis. And for those who maybe are not so familiar or need to re-jog their memory, Photosynthesis is the process where plants take sunlight energy and they convert water and carbon dioxide, and they convert that into sugar and oxygen. Okay, the sugar that the plant can go on to use and the oxygen that we get. Okay, that's a very simple version. And so the rest of these chemicals here, the things like potassium, like phosphorus, those are for the development of the flower and the plant itself, whether it's the development of the roots, of the fruit. Potassium helps keep the water balance so that the plant stays upright. And for iron, that's to help transport oxygen around the body of the plant. So it's a lot like our own hemoglobin. We need iron in there. And then calcium also helps to strengthen the cell wall, which if you think about calcium for us, right, we think of it as like helping with the bone. So in both cases, calcium actually helps with increasing structural integrity of the organism. I think it's pretty cool. And all of this to say is that mealworm frass has a lot of great nutrients, and it makes a great fertilizer for the plants that we have, whether they're household plants or the microalgae, which we'll be talking about today. Okay, which brings us to the next part, which is, of all the plants that we could grow, why are we focusing so much on microalgae? And the importance of microalgae, which I hinted to before, is because of its sustainability aspects and how it can help us solve multiple problems, one of the biggest being air pollution. And I will go into more explanation in the next webinar, but in general, you can think of microalgae as being one of the best air purifiers in the world, and this is natural, right? And the great thing about it is that it does what plants do, which is consume CO2 and exhale oxygen, right? Except it does that in a much smaller form, right? And microalgae do it at a much more efficient rate than do a lot of houseplants, and that is tied a little bit to the way that it's in the water and the size of it. But in general, it's just very potent, and you can actually grow it quite easily yourself. And, in terms of the potential of microalgae, it's often thought as part of like reshaping what we think of as a sustainable future, and it can go into topics such as renewable energies, as medicine, cosmetics, water and air purification, which I've talked about, and then even when we start talking about human food, right? So there's a lot of different ways that microalgae, as we study it, as we learn about our relationship to it, that it can help us as just like humans in general. Okay, and like I said, microalgae is very easy to grow and cultivate, especially in urban environments. You don't actually need that much space. And while if you're growing it on a large scale, you would need a lot of space to do like particular jobs such as this air purification. But for our purposes, we're going to try to keep everything small so you guys can do it at home. Okay, so microalgae in nature, that basically microalgae love wet and moist environments. They're found in both salt and fresh water, which is kind of rare for a lot of species. They generally like to choose one or the other. And they're able to live on land. Well, while they mostly like to live in the water, they are able to live on land if they form these symbiotic relationships, or these relationships where both parties are benefiting. If they form this relationship with a type of fungi, which is known as lichen. And when we look at how different environments form, lichen are often one of the first, they're called the pioneer species, and they're one of the first species to be able to come to a new environment. And it's in part because of their symbiotic relationship with microalgae. So generally you'll find them underneath rocks. You can find microalgae like in the water a lot of the times. In places like Hong Kong, where it is more moist, after it has rained a lot, there'll be microalgae everywhere. and just regular algae in general on everything. Okay, and so what do we actually need in order to grow microalgae? This is split into just 4 very basic components, the same as plants. They need sunlight, they need air, they need water, and they need nutrients, so like their food. And so that's pretty simple. And at home, that is something that we can give them. And as long as we also give them space and a place to be, then they're pretty happy, actually. Okay, and we're going to be growing them indoors and using what's called a photobioreactor, which maybe sounds kind of complex, but it is actually quite simple. And let me just, I'll come back to that in a few slides about what that actually is. Okay, but first let's just talk about how to take care of microalgae. And microalgae needs to grow in a warm, sunny place, so a windowsill is really great. Sometimes if the sun is either too bright or the conditions are not quite right, you can actually use an LED light to grow them as well. And you want to be adding fertilizer to your photobioreactor once a week. You want to filter out any biomass that ends up accumulating there, and you need to protect it from dust, so we're going to use a sponge in order to stop dust from entering. Otherwise, you can have a whole bunch of other things growing in the water other than the microalgae, which is not what you want. And the lifespan of microalgae is only about 30 days. And so after a while, you're going to have this bottle that's going to grow this microalgae, and it'll turn this beautiful shade of green, and it'll get progressively darker. And at about 30 days, as the microalgae starts to die, you're going to start to get the water turning from green to brown. And at that stage, you're going to want to filter it out. And that's perfectly fine. And I just want, before we start with the actual activity, here's a fun fact of just about like microalgae, because microalgae is one of the oldest living organisms that we know. You can see on this tree of life diagram that plots out the taxonomy of so many different species, of how they evolved. The first microalgae showed up, I can't zoom in here, but it's a very long time ago. Compared to humans, we're literally in the very last leg of the evolutionary timescale. This is to say that microalgae, not so different from insects really, are able to do the jobs that they evolved to do so well that they haven't needed to change all of these years. And that's pretty special, and that's why it's important for us to learn from these types of organisms. Okay, and another fact is that microalgae are some of the smallest living functional organisms that we know about. And they're generally about 0.05 to 0.5 millimeters, and you'll need a microscope in order to see them. And they're generally only single-celled organisms. So maybe I might be getting a little too technical here, but a lot of organisms were generally made of a whole bunch of cells all put together, and microalgae is a little different, it's just a single cell. Okay, and the last thing is just to touch on why are we actually growing both mealworms and microalgae. Like I said, we're using mealworm frass in order to grow these microalgae. And both of these things, the Hive Explorer and our use of the microalgae to learn about the photobioreactor, they help us learn about these environmental problems and learn about just different opportunities and aspects of the sustainability solutions that we're offering up, and the things that the students can try. Because like I've said in some of the other webinars, is that the Hive Explorer is a really great teaching tool, because even though we made this device and it is a linear system, there's a lot of things that we can do in order to make it to actually close the loop and create a circular system where we're not wasting any of, or just very little of the materials that come up in the hive. So that's really important. And the microalgae is just one way for us to get there. And the students really love making the photobioreactors. Actually, the way that we do this webinar, this workshop is generally we'll split the class into 2 teams, and the students will race in order to put the photobioreactor together. And they find it really cool that they can grow these things in the classroom. And that's something we like to bring to them as well. Okay, so now we're going to get to what a photobioreactor actually is, right? The photobioreactor is just a transparent container, and it uses some kind of light source and in doing that, it's able to grow a bunch of microorganisms. And if we look at the term photobioreactor, photo means light, bio means living, and reactor is a place where a reaction takes place. Right, and a photobioreactor is actually quite simple. We have these materials. We have a bottle. This is just the bottle that we have at the office, the plastic bottle. You can literally just use something that you, like if you actually did end up buying a water bottle, then you can use one of those, recycle those, or if you have a friend who is using one, that's fine too. Okay, we have, these are called air stones, and this is generally, you can find it at an aquarium store. Basically, we're going to hook it up to this thing, which is an air pump. And we often provide these to the schools, but they are quite cheap as well. And again, it's linked to aquariums. And then there's these pipes, which also you can get at the aquarium store. And it's just an air hose, and we're going to be hooking everything up here. So those are the 4 very basic components. I'm going to be, excuse me 1 second. Okay. Whoop. So I think you can see, right? You can see the water, you can see this. And all you're going to do is hook in the hose into the air pump. You're going to hook the air stone. And later, all you have to do, so you're going to need this hydroponic sponge as well, or just some kind of sponge actually, which you can cut and fill the hole. And so later, we're going to put the solution inside here. We're going to dangle this in there, and we're going to put the tube in here so that you can see it's pretty tight. We keep the dust out. We keep things like, actually bugs also love laying their eggs inside water, like mosquitoes. That's why you don't have still water. And this should keep them out and should keep them happy. So it's pretty simple. And then you put this by the windowsill. Oops. Okay. And okay, so let's just start making this photobioreactor. So I have this bottle here, and like I said, I had the frass. I actually took 5 grams of this, and I put it into 200 milliliters of water. Looks a little gross. That's normal. And I actually let it sit for about half an hour. Actually, even 15 minutes is okay. And we're going to actually make 2 photobioreactors. Okay, so this first one is going to have water, and it's going to have a concentrated solution of microalgae, which we got in the office, but you can actually get it from pond water or from a stream if you live near there. You just take a bottle out there and you look for a running stream, and then you can just pick up some of the water, and you might not see anything at the time. It'll be white most likely, but if you leave it after a few days, then the microalgae will almost always start to grow. Okay, so this one, like I said, water and microalgae, just that. And then in this one, it's going to be water, microalgae, and then the frass as well. Okay, so let's just start with the water first. I'm going to be putting 200 milliliters in here. Let's see. It doesn't have to be super, super, super exact. Okay, 3. Okay, and then I have this microalgae solution, and I'm going to put 50 milliliters in there. All right, you can see this is already green. And for this one, we're going to then fill it up all the way. And by the way, I just want to take this opportunity. If you have any questions, please just put them in the chat. I can answer them while I'm completing this. Feel free. You don't have to just talk about microalgae either. You're welcome to discuss the Hive Explorer, anything else that you're interested in. Okay, so we have this one that's done. Here we're going to put the water again, 200 milliliters first. The ratio will depend on your bottle, how much water your bottle takes. And I'm gonna put in this as well. Okay, good. Okay, and then just to make pouring easier, I'm actually going to filter. This is a mesh bag. This is just something we have at the office, but you can use other kinds of mesh as well. I'm just going to use it to filter out the solid bits of the frass. As you can see, there's a lot of things hanging out there. Okay. All right, and then what you get afterwards is this nice brown liquid. Okay, I'm going to pour this all in here. All right. Okay, and we're going to mix both of these around a little. I'm going to mix this one as well. And if you use pond water, just remember that you're not really going to get this green color at first, which is totally normal. The green will actually start to develop over a few days. And now all we need to do now is hook up our air source. Okay. In here. All right, and then we're going to use the hydroponic sponge here, and we actually don't want the air stone to touch the bottom. So as you can see, it's just a little higher from the bottom. That's perfect. Okay, and then for this one, put that in, and don't let it hit the bottom again. And there we go. So all that's left to do, there you go. Oops. Okay, the bubble was too high, but yep. So that's it. You're just going to let them bubble. You want to make sure that it doesn't fizz up. I guess because of the frass, it's having more of an issue. So I might want to get rid of some of the water. But in general, it should bubble up like this. And we're going to put it by the windowsill. And next week, we'll discuss any differences we see. And yeah, we'll actually take a look at these guys under the microscope too to see if anything grows. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to put these aside for now. Okay, and that brings us to the end of this webinar. It was pretty succinct, actually. Yeah, so if you want to send in questions, please do that. We find that this lesson is really great because of the hands-on aspect to it. This was done quite quickly, but as you can imagine, in a classroom of, like, say, 30 students, young students especially, it can take a lot longer to do. Let's see if we have any frequently asked questions, or maybe I can take you guys through the worksheet as well. Okay, and I can talk a little bit about microalgae just in case you are confused. All microalgae is that it's algae, but it's microscopic, it's very small. And so algae can include things like seaweed, for example. That's an example of generally quite a large type of algae, and microalgae come on the other side of that. And they're a lot like plants, except they just live in the water. And they're like microalgae, they tend to be single-celled. So there's actually something called the fisherman's eyeball. If anyone's a diver and they've seen that, that's actually this really big kind of globular, silverish, blackish thing that's in the water, and it's just a circle. And you can, if you ever gone snorkeling or diving and you find it, you take a look and it's filled with things on the inside, and it's actually quite large. But as it turns out, it is a type of algae as well, and it's a single-celled organism. So that entire thing that's huge is a single cell, and I think that's pretty freaking cool. Things like an egg, for example, that is also a single cell. And so you can hold single cells. We think of, like, since cells are so tiny, we can't see them without a microscope, and often that is the case. But there are cases like with eggs, which are single cells. It's like that's an entire cell right there. So yeah, there's some pretty cool things to talk about. Okay, it seems like we don't have so many people today, so I can actually end early, but I just want to send a reminder to everyone. You can look that you get a discount code. This is exclusively for people who attend the webinar. You get 20% off, so please check out the Hive Explorer. And in case you're more interested about this lesson, or just like the possibilities for poop and frass in general, just know that we've also just put on a blog post on the Hive Explorer website that is an exploration into poop and insect poop and how insects use them, because it's, like I said, yes, it's good fertilizer, it's a good resource. Insects have just found a lot of really strange ways to use their poop so that it doesn't go to waste, and that they can use it to help them survive and help their offspring survive to the next generation. Okay, so yeah, just take a look at that. There's a lot of other articles on there as well. You can follow our social media posts. And yeah, I hope you guys had a good time. You can always send us questions. We'll actually, if you send it straight to contact@liveandfarms.com, we'll answer those. And yeah, I'm gonna leave I'm going to leave the workshop slide up for a little bit. Our next webinar is going to be part 2 of this one. That one will be looking at the sustainability implications of microalgae, at least in more depth than what we've talked about today. It'll talk about the benefits of growing microalgae in your home or just in general. And the activity will be comparing the the CO2 capacity of the microalgae comparing them. And like I said, they are quite good air purifiers, so we'll be testing that out. And we'll also be looking at microalgae under the microscope. So hopefully I can get that to work. I love microscopes and I'm excited about that. All right, and like I said, before you go, please check out our post-webinar survey, and please help to give whatever feedback you have, especially if this is not your only webinar that you've been to. We would love to hear more. We're very new at this. And yeah, use the discount code. We're having some really cool giveaways, and just look at our social media. You'll see it all there. All right, thanks everyone.